he had.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you and welcome to this special meeting of the Pipestone County Commissioners. This is May 15th and it is 3 o'clock. 17th. Thank you.
Uh-oh, what just happened to my camera?
And the purpose of this special meeting then is to discuss finances and so forth. I'm going to update them from Hometown Fiber and their representatives. Joining us today, well, first of all, serving from the board today, we've got Commissioner Johnson, Commissioner Doug Nagel, Commissioner Dallas Roskamp, Commissioner Chris Hollingsworth, myself, Dan Wildermuth, and also our administrator, Steve Ewing. Also in the room with us, then we've got Terry Nelson of Woodstock Telephone joining us as well too. So then joining us on video, then we have got three representatives then of Hometown Fiber. So we got Marlena, and we also have got Laura Lewis, and Laura Lewis represents Lewis, Young, and
Robertson and Birmingham. We're trying to shorten that name by the end of this year.
And Kyle, thank you for joining us as well. Steve, anything to open it up with, or should we just open it up to Marlena and you can lead us off?
Okay. Can everyone hear each other okay? How's the audio?
Great.
It's good.
Okay.
Good. Well, thank you for taking the time to join us.
Well, thank you. Thank you for holding this meeting. So I think the point of this is that at the last meeting that we held in the last presentation, there had been some variance in numbers and costs and things like that. And it left you with some more questions, right? Perhaps more questions than answers. And our next advisable step was for you to speak to an experienced financial advisor on this, right?
Yes.
So that you can have some better understanding and you have somebody professional in this to guide you and give you the answers that you need. So depending on it, I mean, if you have a list of questions that you'd like to start with, or if you would like Laura to kind of start doing her thing, that's up to you.
Just let them.
Yeah, we don't have any prepared questions at all. We'll certainly listen to you.
Okay. All right, so you want me to launch ahead here, Marlena?
Yeah, so Laura, you joined us at I think you zoomed in towards the end of it.
Yes.
And the big question here, right, is, or I believe where they're having most questions is how these bonds get repaid, how the network operations go to repay the bonds, right? And then the ask is for them to put up the money for the network architecture design, because that needs to be completed for grant application. And this is hugely reliant on grant application.
Yes. Okay, so for those, just like one, because I know this is being recorded, it's an open meeting. I just want to state who I am, what my role is with other clients, that I have not been officially hired by Pipestone, but I have sort of the desire to represent local governments kind of is in my blood, for lack of a better word. I mean, that's who I'm the mother bear to professionally with my other clients. So my name is Laura Lewis. I am the Lewis of Lewis, Young, Robertson, Birmingham. We are municipal financial advisors. I do have a number of securities licenses. I have what's called a Series 50 license, which allows me to be a municipal advisor. It's a licensure that's provided by the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board, and we are overseen by the Securities and Exchange Commission. As municipal advisor, we have a duty of care, a duty of fiduciary duty, a duty of obligation to my clients. At some point, I hope that I, can work with Pipestone in that role on this transaction to help you get, fiber to the home. Open access fiber to the home. I'm a huge proponent of open access, which is what's being, proposed here. I have done close to just a little over $1 billion in financing for fiber to the home projects. Of note, 60 million. I think it may not be the most recent. No, it was bigger than that. But I did a project in Bozeman, Montana. The interesting element to that one, it was done about 1.5 years ago. And it only had fiber system revenues was its only revenue source. Now, the markets were different then than they are today. And yet the markets are warming up to, fiber system revenue bonds. But to get them, across the finish line today, there would still need to be some type of participation by the local government. And I have done many where the local government sort of fully backstops that. I have done, some where the local government partially backstops it. And then I've just given you the example for a transaction I've done that was not backstopped. It was all done by, the bonds were issued based on the projections in terms of take rate. Now that particular project, I met with Greg, the guy that oversees that up in Bozeman a few weeks ago at the Broadband Communities Conference in Houston. And they're behind construction a little bit because it was a really hard winter, but things are going gangbusters again. And, I have every expectation based on updated projections that they will, be as successful as we've projected them to be, and bonds will easily get paid. So that's a little bit about who I am, why I, have some expertise in this area. I have worked with several local governments. I would say the bulk of my work has been in Utah so far, but we are retained to work on a large project in California, serving rural California. And I just came back from meetings with them, with some potential investors. And you had some interesting insight because those counties like you will be, dependent on, and there's 40 rural counties in California, and to varying degrees they are dependent upon various grant monies that are available through the federal government as well as the state. And I've done 2 projects in Idaho, 1 in Wyoming. California, Utah. I feel like I'm missing someone, and now Minnesota. But so if I've missed someone, sorry to that client that I've missed listing. So that's how I come to you. My expertise is on the financial side, and making sure that it's reasonable. If anyone marches in and says, "I guarantee," that should be your first concern, because it's no one can guarantee. But as I tell my clients, my goal is to put on belts, suspenders, duct tape, whatever I can to to try to make sure that your financings are successful and are paid from the system revenues that are intended to use to pay them. So to that end, as you know, I just got a set of numbers after we last met, and I have been traveling, mostly related to fiber projects. And so I haven't had enough time to do a really deep dive, but I can tell you, kind of high level, some of my observations and things that I, my advice in regard to, sort of the next step where you are. And I see that the current estimated construction cost is in the neighborhood of $24 million. And that has, I think, a cost per home or business passed of about $4,600. That cost per pass nationwide average, and again, so this would include more dense areas and more rural areas. The average is about $3,400 to $3,500, and yet we see it. Those go up significantly in rural areas such as yours. So as I looked at that cost per pass, it didn't. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, I'm in a, heart attack. I mean, it seems very much in the realm of reasonableness to me. I am not a fiber engineer, so I would pick apart effectively the detail of the construction estimate to the extent I'm able to, by knowing, oh, this might be how this compares to this, area A, B, and C. I know enough to know that, going through rock is way more expensive than going through sand and gravel and clay. And I would ask questions about that. I think it's advisable, always to have, someone with that level of expertise in that construction end to look over the numbers, because I can provide a high level look, but a little bit deeper dive, I think, is always beneficial for all parties to the transaction. I know a lot about how we can get this financed, and we'll speak to that in a moment. But my initial look is that this is tight. At $24 million construction, this is tight, but these are preliminary numbers. My gut kind of tells me that they might be on the high end, so hopefully kind of the worst case scenario. And if we were to get in the $20 million realm in terms of construction, that would feel a little bit more comfortable to me. But it's not going to be 20 million just because I want it to be 20 million. It's going to be 20 million in
Use your magic wand, Laura.
Yes, yeah.
Just bippity boppity boo it.
So it really is important to go to the go to the next step and figure out what those numbers effectively really are. Some people refer to it as the low level instead of the high level. The low level engineering and design work. It's more accurately called the full scale design of the network architecture, to know what kind of costs we're looking at. You need that for us to really fully vet, does this work, does this not work, as well as that's something you're going to have before you can apply for grants. So this meeting, meetings plural, I just attended with the RCRC representatives. RCRC stands for Rural County Representatives of California. So they have a staff that the RCRC is those group of counties in an interlocal cooperative, and their staff has been tasked with sort of come hell or high water, figure out a way to get fiber to rural California. The picture of a little girl sitting on the steps outside of Taco Bell so that she could connect to the internet to go to school during COVID was in a city in rural California, and they do not want that to be their lasting legacy for fiber deployment or for internet accessibility. So, come hell or high water, figure this out. So they are to the point where they are now spending what, the monies that you're being asked to spend in order to get to that, more full scale design of the network. And so it is my most immediate frame of reference for the general cost of that in a rural area. There are 4 cities in, oh my gosh, what is the name of the county? It's where there's whales. Oh my goodness,
Whales.
They have a nice aquarium in this particular county. I can't think of the name of it all of a sudden.
Monterey.
Ooh, thank you.
Really?
Ding 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 ding.
Whale watching there.
Monterey. So when I think of Monterey County, I've been to the aquarium in Monterey. I've been to but I was not at all familiar with the broader county, and they have 4 small cities in particular in the south end of Monterey County that are in desperate need for fiber. It's very agriculturally driven in terms of their economy. That sounds familiar to you. Probably raise different crops than you do, but very much an agricultural area. And they're spending in total $2 million on that design detail, that, you know, because they are applying for grants, they are trying to get the financing that you are. You know, they'll be issuing bonds. I think they'll probably issue about 50 some odd million. And I can't remember the number in terms of grant. So literally just yesterday and Monday, I heard, you know, the whole, we've got to move ahead of this. It's the next step. You have to have it in order to get the, you know, to apply for the grants. And I realize it's a lot of money. I realize it's real money, but I can't really give you my best advice relative to what's this going to cost per home. Is it reasonable to assume XYZ take rate? So will this cash flow until we have that number? So I will tell you that we see, what I have seen in rural areas with open access fiber networks is the take rate is generally pretty high. It's not unreasonable. So, and so you've got a couple of things, you know, that sort of push and, you know, reinflate the balloon to some degree. So typically take rates are high in rural areas because you have no choices. It's not like, you know, if you're going from DSL to internet, if there's any way that people can afford internet, they're going to choose it, or to choose the fiber, excuse me, DSL versus fiber, you're going to choose the fiber system. It's faster, it's more reliable, blah, blah, blah. So we see a high demand for it, and that demand's not being met. It's more helpful, again, to have open access because they can still have choices. So, you know, if you have incumbent providers out there, it's expensive to deploy fiber to the home. That's why I am a huge proponent of governments doing the infrastructure of the fiber, but not, you know, being an internet service provider. That's, you know, you know how to do infrastructure. Yes, this is a new kind of infrastructure, but you know how to do roads, water, sewer lines. Those are all infrastructure. This is, as my kids would argue, that fiber infrastructure is more necessary to them than water. But so, you know, that's where I think the role should be for local government, is to do the infrastructure. If, you know, you could choose to operate it yourself. Again, most local governments don't do that. Most local governments have, you know, someone like Hometown Fiber in my neck of the woods, Spectrum. Not the right name, starts with an S, Strata, excuse me, has got some contracts in Providence and in Lehigh. And, you know, so we have to be careful how we craft those contracts so that we can still issue the bonds on a tax exempt basis. But again, the benefit to your incumbents is that they can ride on that system. Any, you know, qualified provider could ride on your system. So, you know, that's a huge benefit, and that will typically help the take rate as well, because I've got choice, I've got quality of service. And so when I look at the numbers that, you know, I've been able to look at preliminarily, I haven't done the deep dive, a take rate in the range of, you know, 33 to 40% doesn't concern me at all. If it was, oh, we have to have a take rate of 80%, yeah, I'd be saying we need to hit the slow down button. But what I'm looking at preliminarily doesn't concern me in terms of the viability of this transaction from the point of system revenues being able to pay for the debt service. Now, what I envision, and this is very high level, we'll get down to the weeds as, you know, if you choose to proceed. But very high level, what I generally would anticipate is that the city would issue bonds, and you know, we can do that kind of along a spectrum of, you know, again, put on your bond purchaser hat, right? The more secure it is to them, the lower the interest rate, the more risk that the bondholder is taking, the higher the interest rate. And, ideally, I want to strike a reasonable balance in that structure. So if you came to me and said, okay, we want to do this, we're all in, and your job, Laura, is to get me the absolute lowest possible interest rate. Well, I say to myself, oh, it's pretty easy to do general obligation bonds in Minnesota. I was quite surprised to learn how easy it was, because it's not that way in any other state that I work in. So yes, is going to provide the lowest interest cost. It's going to provide, that lower interest cost and feeds into these numbers should equal a lower cost to your end user. The challenge with that, obviously, is it's using up general obligation capacity, and it does put the risk squarely in your court. The good news is we don't have to have that as our only option. But it will be important for there to be some type of, city participation. I mean, you've got to have some skin in the game for the bond market to want to purchase these system revenue bonds. Now, that participation can come in several ways. So I think that the ask is roughly $1 million in order to do the full-scale network architectural design of this system. So if that's money you have in your budget and you budget that, then that can, we would be able to show, oh, look, they've already paid for this $1 million, because I have, in many instances, we have funded that out of bond proceeds. Well, the fact that you're going to, consider funding that up front, one, it becomes, a piece of the skin in the game that you can put in, and it readies you to hit the ground running in terms of building when the bond financing gets done. Whereas if I'm funding that from the bond, it's, we're sitting around for 6 months or whatever it takes, and no building's going on because we're still waiting for that design, and those transactions have a lot of contingency built in, which can drive the end cost, right, of what to the end user. And we have to structure around what if there are excess proceeds left over and whatever. So huge benefit to get that done now. If you were to say, well, we can fund that now, but when a bond is issued, we need that money back. We can do what's called a reimbursement resolution, and when the bonds are issued, you could reimburse the county for that expenditure. Again, but then that leads me back into okay, where's the county's skin in the game going to come from? Now, I can think of nothing if I'm not ripe with ideas, and then we have to find out what works best for the county. You could fund the debt service reserve fund with cash on hand. You could agree to on an annually appropriated basis, you could agree to replenish that reserve fund if it was drawn upon up to a certain element level. So there are ways that I would work with you. This isn't me coming in and dictating this is how it has to be. This is me, if you retain me, coming in and saying, here are some options of how we can evidence to the bond investing market that you have some skin in the game, that this is important to you. Here are some options. What works best for you? What do you hate? You throw up on it, then I'm not going to use that. But I think we can come to something that works at a minimum, like bare minimum. I would like, to be able to show something like 20% of, I say the word equity, but it's not really equity like in a stock market, but 20% of the project cost of skin in the game. That's where I'd like to get. And again, that doesn't necessarily
We have froze up, so I don't know if you can hear me or not. We'll buffer here and see if we can get you back. Even our screen is still live. Oh, yeah.
So far, so good.
They're back now.
We're back. We were here. We stayed together.
Oh, their audio is muted.
Nope.
We can't hear you, Chair.
We're coming.
There
Okay.
you go.
We're
No,
back. We
we're
lost
good.
our internet and now we're hardwired on now, so we should be good for the rest of the meeting. So
Very good.
go back 2 minutes and start over.
If only there was a sign.
Yeah.
Fine.
One of the things, the last things you talked about was a 20% buy-in on our part, the 20% skin in the game of our part is where you left off at.
Okay, great. So there are several options of how you can do that. One of those would be if it were, politically palatable to you. One of those would be to basically break the funding up into two pieces. And we could either do, 20 or 30% of the build as a general obligation bond and the balance. So I'll pick, 20 because that's what I was talking about. Had a $20 million issue. You did 20% in terms of this, again, one option, not the only option, as a general obligation bond to fund that, some portion of it into the system. And then the balance, the 16 million, we would issue as system revenue bonds. And it's important for you to understand that that piece of debt, the risk to you is, in terms of could those bondholders, if they agree to buy those bonds based on the system revenues, and those system revenues don't materialize in full, can they come back to you and say, pay up? These are your bonds. I got your name on them. Pay up. Legally, the answer is no. They have the offering document will describe in very fine detail as to what the revenues are that are available for those bonds to be repaid. And they will know. And again, I'm still learning a little bit about Minnesota law. The Bozeman transaction was what we refer to in my world as a double-barrel bond, which I can do in Montana. I cannot do in Utah. If I can do it in Minnesota, I would do the same thing. That double barrel means that we provide to the bond purchasers of those system revenue bonds. They can have legal access to the system revenues, and they can have a security interest in the system itself. So, they basically get, if the bonds don't pay for themselves, they come in and take back the system. They think they can operate it better or give it to someone who can, and then they'll have the system revenues. So in that case, the security for those bonds is the asset itself, the fiber, the huts, the electronics, the conduit. That actually is an asset. We would pledge that, and we would pledge the system revenues off of that asset. So if things go to hell in a handbasket and don't materialize like you think, then the trustee on behalf of the bondholders comes in and says, well, it looks like, we think maybe you could raise your revenues. And so we're going to force you to do that. Oh, look, we raised the prices and people went off. So we're not really that's not really helping. But they cannot, there's no legal way for them to come in and demand that you pay with your property taxes or your water system revenues or whatever other revenues you have available. They do not have the legal right to do that. Now, if we did this in two pieces, the general obligation piece, they would have that right? But the fiber system revenue bonds would not. Now,
Laura, if we did get in that position though, Laura, yes, they might not be able to require us to have to do
Yes.
that. What would
Yep.
it do to our bond rating? That's very important to
Yes.
us.
and that I was going there next.
I apologize.
So I was putting on my mind reading. No, I've been to this rodeo more than once. So you are exactly right, and it's a good thing to be concerned about, especially in light of Standard & Poor's took and many of us in the industry are kind of reeling over the way they approach it, and I'll have to do some research. It was back in I want to say Illinois, but I'll have to give you the finer details. As a general rule, bonds, the issue itself is what carries a rating, right? So there are kind of two components to that rating usually. The two components of the rating are what is the risk on this particular bond issue? And I'm thinking the fiber revenue bonds in this instance are going to be non-rated. So they wouldn't carry a rating. But when they come to do your general obligation rating, they rate the likelihood that they think those bonds are going to be repaid, and they're going to come up with some nice investment grade rating. Then there's what they call an issuer, ICR, issuer credit rating. That is just kind of your general credit, right? So in this instance, in what I'm pretty certain was Illinois, I think it was a tax increment revenue bond. And not dissimilarly to, the idea that the system revenue bond is the system revenues are what the security is. Those bonds were rated based solely on what the tax increment was going to be. And lo and behold, it didn't materialize. The bonds defaulted, and the action that S&P took that kind of shocked the whole bond community was that they downgraded their general obligation bonds. And we're like, we don't agree. I don't know how they're pushing back on that, because in my world, it's like the rating attaches to the particular security, not broadly. So you're wise in thinking about it, because it won't be lost on them, right? It's not like, consumer debt example, it's not the perfect example, but it's a reasonable one. The consumer debt example I can give you is, if you have a mortgage on your home and you have a car loan, and the security for your car loan is your car, the security for your mortgage is your home. You're paying your mortgage, life is good, you're staying in your home, wonderful, but the budget gets tight and you don't pay on your car loan. The car lender comes in and takes your car back. Right? So you've lost that security. They've taken their collateral back, which isn't great, but you still have your home because you're making your home payment. But we all know that from a consumer debt perspective, that default on the car loan is going to impact your credit rating. It would be unwise for me to suggest that it wouldn't if those bonds don't get paid. So it will have some impact in terms of higher interest rate if you went to do other bonds in the future. But I can tell you with, lots of examples that it will not mean that you can't access the bond rate. I can, sadly, and I'm not thinking of anyone, thankfully, I've not worked on any bonds that are defaulted. But there have been in my industry credits where there have been, major defaults, and in Orange County, California, years ago. And they were back in the market not all that long after. So it's not like the market isn't accessible to you anymore. It's that it might be more expensive. So enter your financial advisor, whether that's me or another financial advisor. I consider my job is to do everything I can to make sure that doesn't happen. Again, I cannot guarantee that, right? But I am going to suggest to you, okay, I'm not the best one to look and see whether, there's anything that needs to be tweaked in regard to the estimated costs once we get that full scale design. But I would say, oh, you might want to, check with someone who can do that. But I'm the one who can say, okay, does it seem reasonable that, your constituency can pay X dollars per month for this service? Does it seem reasonable based on all the other things I've seen that you're going to have this kind of take rate? Does it seem reasonable that you can get this constructed in 3 years? So I'll put kind of the reasonable test around that. And then I will seek to structure your debt so that those system revenues repay that debt. That is my job. As just stated, I have yet to have a transaction go into default, and I've done this for 34 years. That does not mean that I haven't had clients where we've structured debt and they're calling me going, Houston, we have a problem, right? Whatever that problem might be. And we jump in and we figure out how to restructure the debt. We figure out, I mean, sometimes I've been called in Houston, we have a problem because our previous financial advisor, was not me, told us that if we used a fire station to cross collateralize a golf course, that if we defaulted, that they wouldn't come in and take the fire station and city hall if we didn't pay on the golf course bonds. I'm like, yeah, no. They are going to take your fire station and your city hall because you used it as cross collateralized. So, oh, we've got to solve this problem. Again, I didn't create the problem, but we came up with a solution. They didn't default, they paid. So again, that's why I will structure things with a reserve fund. We'll say, okay, it's going to take, Kyle can answer this, not me. I'm going to guess 3 years to get this fully built out. It might be 2. But we'll build in, and it does drive up the cost of the par amount of the bonds, but it protects you from default. We will build in my world, there's a feature called capitalized interest. We borrow, I don't want to do it just to do it. We do it for a reason. So the bond market they're called fixed income investments because what do they want? They want fixed income. They want to know every 6 months they're going to get a payment. So if we structure something that I'm expecting these system revenues to repay the bonds, they're going to want payments in 6 months. Well, that's a problem because you can't get it built in 6 months. It's not going to be generating revenues in 6 months. So we actually borrow money from those investors, or again, it's another place that the county could help. We could say we can move money. If you have money in unrestricted funds, we could say, okay, is it going to be okay for your budget to restrict some of those funds and put that in a reserve fund? We could fund some of it with capitalized interest and not have to borrow it. But we structure it so that there's a pot of money, usually out of bond proceeds, that makes those interest payments until the time that your system gets built and has connections. So I try to structure it to make sure, okay, you have time to build, you have time to get the connections. It's reasonable to expect the number of connections. And you probably have a better sense of that even than me. I mean, you're the boots on the ground. You hear your neighbors, you hear the, agricultural community crying for this service or whatever. You probably have a better sense than me. Do we think this is reasonable? If we think it's reasonable, then here's what the cash flows look like. And again, nicely in the bond world, we have the ability to ramp debt service up over time. So in the consumer world, we'll go in and get a mortgage that's fixed rate, and we walk out with a fixed payment every month, right? Starting from month 1. In the bond world, we have the ability to say, oh, look, here's how my revenues grow. My revenues are growing like this. So we structure the debt like that, right? So I will do everything in my power to structure the debt around what are reasonable assumptions relative to those take rates and those revenues. But you're right. If you end up defaulting, then it will provide sort of a black eye, so to speak, on the next time you go to do bonds. But I would suggest that, again, what I or any hopefully other rational, financial advisor would do is to sort of come rushing in before then and say, what can we do to prevent this default? And maybe there's nothing. I mean, if you build this and you get 0 users, there's probably not anything. And I think the likelihood of that is next to 0 from what I've seen. If you build this and you get 3/4 of the users that you're planning, well, again, we're going to structure this debt so that there's some estimated debt service coverage, right? If we assume there's going to be $1 in net revenue, I'm not going to bond to the dollar. I'm going to bond to 80 cents, right? So I'm going to have some headroom. So let's say you get 75% of the way there and I've assumed 80. Well, then there's a delta. What do we want to do? Do we want to go to the bondholders and see if they'll allow us to restructure? It's costly, but we avoid a default. Do we take these bonds from a 25-year amortization to a 30 in order to do that? So there's there are solutions that I would, try to come in and say, what can we do here? One of the solutions might be, and this is maybe a little bit more than just hearsay, but it's nothing I can evidence with hard data right now. But as I attend these broadband conferences, I have heard several professionals say that once a system is in the ground, it is typically worth more than what it costs to build it, because prices are going up. And once it's ready to rock and roll, that there are buyers for that, right? So that could be a potential solution. But I wouldn't want you to enter into this, not being aware of the point you said is if you default, even though they can't come back and force you to raise taxes, there would be a black eye.
Okay, but you are also saying that if that were to happen, right? I mean, there are warning signs on this, and you jump in front of it, and there are options to move things.
Certainly. I mean,
Okay.
I'll tell you, even in Bozeman, because they have to file quarterly quarterly reports with the MSRB, because the bonds are publicly issued. They have to file quarterly reports of, how's their construction going and how's their whatever. And I mean, I wouldn't say my hair was on fire, but certainly it's like, oh my gosh, why didn't you start in March like we thought, right? Well, it was 18 below and the ground was frozen hard as a rock. So we have to disclose that. I have to be, thinking about that. What's that going to do in terms of delaying those revenues? Have I built in enough headroom? Yay, so far so good, right? But it's I don't wait until the day before the bond payment and have you call me and say, oh dear, we have a problem.
So as their financial advisor, then what kind of access do they have to you, and for what amount of time?
Okay. So in the municipal bond world, most, and it's an odd thing. So if you were to whip up the Government Finance Officers Associations, their, what do they call them? My criteria is not the right word, but they're like their best standards that they recommend. They suggest that you should hire a financial advisor on an hourly basis. And I do not have one client who pays me on an hourly basis. And I have many clients. All of my clients pay me out of the bond proceeds, because I know, and they know, I know that, their budget doesn't have line item for me in it because they weren't planning on doing bonds. So best practices. So GFOA says best practices are to pay your financial advisor hourly. Their rationale for that is that then I won't be, I as your financial advisor, whoever they are, wouldn't be recommending debt that you wouldn't otherwise need because you're just going to pay me hourly. Well, the counter to that in my world is if I'm going to be unscrupulous and stupid and suggest that you issue debt that you don't need, then I'm going to be unscrupulous when I'm charging you by hour, right? I mean, and that is why I'd say, I mean, I do not have one client that pays me hourly. So if you want to pay me hourly, yay. I'm fine with that. I actually prefer the, being paid out of the bond issue, where, that I'm motivated to get the deal done. What keeps me from, doing crazy things is I want to get hired again by other people. I want to be able to use you as a reference. I don't have a client that I would not use as a reference. So I, that's what kind of, quote unquote, if you would say, keeps me honest. I mean, I am just sort of by nature, but I want to do a good job because I want to get hired again. So if you were to retain me on this, I would enter into an agreement with you to charge you so much per thousand of the par amount that's issued, is typically how our fees are charged. And I would take that out of the bond proceeds. So there would be, a list of costs of issuance. I would help you as much as you want to put together your team on the financing. I have clients who say, we want to work with underwriter XYZ. I'm like, great, underwriter XYZ is it. Away we go. If you don't know who you want to work with, I would help you do an RFP for those services. Again, I work in the industry a lot, so I have a sense as to what is reasonable for them to charge, and it differs by the security. They should not charge you as much on a GO bond to underwrite it as they should on a fiber revenue bond. It's a whole different world, right? So I have a sense as to that. I would again similarly help you retain bond and disclosure counsel if if you don't already know who you want to work with. And I basically try to manage that process not in a vacuum. I would do that with whoever you would assign from either one of you or your staff members to get this deal done. We put a calendar together and work toward bond closing.
Okay, well, Laura, you've given us a lot of information. I'd like to open it up for questions at this time. Have you guys got anything you'd like to ask Laura?
Yeah, Laura, what you've told us so far is kind of nice, broad, general comments on how the process works. Can we get down to some specifics of, for the amount that we are told that we need to bond? What would be the length of term? What would be the approximate interest rate? What would be, the time frame that you would be thinking of? What specifically would be your fee involved? And let's kind of get down to the bottom line here.
Okay. So in regard to the interest rate, it's obviously going to be tied to term. I was looking at MMD from a scale I had from the 11th. Let's see if I still have it here. Oh. Hold on, give me a minute. Play the Jeopardy music in your head for a Jeopardy. There it is. Ta-da. So MMD is a scale in my industry that Thomson Reuters puts it out every day the market is open. And on that scale, it's composed of their view of what a general obligation bond would garner in terms of interest rate based on rating and of the 4 rating criteria, the 4 rating categories. So that's AAA is best, AA, single A, and then either triple B or BAA. They're the same thing. Some rating agencies call it this and some rating agencies call it that, right? So I looked at the BAA scale on the 11th, and it went from, again, bonds are sold by maturity. Typically your interest rates are higher out long. I say typically because right now that's not the case. Typically your interest rates are higher out long than they are in the short end. Right now we're in what's called an inverted yield curve, where the first year interest rate is higher than clear out to year 12, believe it or not. So that first year is higher, then it drops back down and ramps back up in a normal yield curve fashion. So I pulled that and I said, okay, well, if these are non-rated bonds, which I'm expecting the fiber enterprise system revenue would be a non-rated transaction. So I took BAA, I added 125 basis points or 1.25% to that. And if we go out, if we were to go all the way out to 25 years, again, it's not just a spot in that 2050 year. It's a what we refer to as WAM, which stands for weighted average maturity, because some of those rates are going to be down at 471, 441, whatever, and some are going to be higher. So if we went to a 25-year, your weighted average maturity is going to be about somewhere in the 19 to 20-year range. And by adding that 125 basis points to the MMD yield, we'd be in the range of a 525 to a 535, give or take. If we were able to shorten that, and I'll get to what would drive us to do one versus the other in a minute, if we were able to shorten that to 20 years, if that were your final maturity, then your weighted average maturity is going to be closer to 14-ish years. And that weighted average rate would be around 5%. So, I'm trying to give you, it depends on the maturity, but to give you at least some spots of what that might look like. So why would I choose one maturity over another? So again, it's going to come down to cash flows, right? What's comfortable to you? The bond market is quite accepting of 30-year bonds. We have to remember that, we will have 3 years where you won't be making any principal payments because the system will be being built. So when we look at that and I say, well, probably at a minimum, then I'm going to want a 23-year transaction. So I've still got 20 years to amortize principal with my 3 years of capitalized interest. That would probably be where I would start. And then I would say, okay, well, that looks like X in terms of what, the payments look like. Again, we'll ramp them up. But by about year 5 or 6, most of these, most fiber systems stabilize in terms of, grows, and then it doesn't go flat, but then the growth, the year over year growth, tapers off, right? Still growth. I've not seen one yet that has had a loss, but still growth. It's just a bit slower growth. So I would look at that and say, okay, knowing that I have to have some type of debt service coverage, I would look at the cash flows, the interest rate, and I would say, oh, look, we're fine. We can amortize this great in 23 years. If it looks tight and I don't have coverage, why do I want coverage? Because the bond market wants it and I want it to protect you. I would say, oh, what does it look like if we do 27? What does it look like if we do 28? What does it look like if we do? I mean, we can run, I've got a guy that runs more numbers than you can even begin to imagine. So we start looking at that and we actually have a way we can say, well, let's reverse engineer that. We know we've got this system or this kind of cash flow. Let's fill that and solve it for as quick as amortization as we can get. So, we might come to a point where, and so again, in my world, I'm like, oh, if 20 million, this seems all doable. If it's 21, maybe we need to take that amortization out longer to make it work. And I know that, sometimes those long-term debts is like, oh my gosh, my first home was 30 years and whatever. In the bond world, not unlike with your mortgage, but a little bit different. Your, consumer mortgage, you can refinance anytime rates go down if you want to. In the bond world, we have what's called call provisions, and the bonds are not callable typically until 10 years. Right now, I've been able to push many underwriters to 9 years without an additional cost in interest rate or call premium. So let's assume we can get a 9-year par call. That would mean you'd have 3 years of cap I. You wouldn't have had to make any payments. You'd be socking away money from that system, right, to help make those payments, but you wouldn't have to make the bond payments until year 4. And in years 4 through 9, barring brain damage, having to go back to the purchasers and renegotiate something. Again, we hope to avoid that. Years 4 through 9, we're going to be effectively stuck with those debt service payments. We can't prepay it. We can't refund it. But in year 9, yay, the whole world opens up because it's callable. By then, what do we have? Oh, we have a history. We know exactly what our revenues are going to be. We know how they'll, likely to grow. We know what the operating expenses are. So in year 9, we might say, oh, let's say first we took out a 30-year bond to help our cash flows. In year 9, we say, oh, we can refund this now, and we don't have to wait 20 more years to pay this off. We can do a refunding bond, and we can now pay it off in 10 more years. And I issue a 10-year bond at that point. So after we hit the call date, we have data history, I should say financial history. We have the financial history, we can show that to the market, we can structure around that, and we can restructure the bonds at that time. Could interest rates be higher and we might not want to restructure? Yes. Will they always be high? You've lived as long as I have, right? I lived through I was writing mortgages. I used to work in the mortgage world. I was writing mortgages at 18% when I first started in my professional career. Thankfully, we're not in that market anymore. The market we're in, people feel like it's really high rates, but they're really not. We've just lived in extraordinarily low rates the past 10 years. So, the markets will move, will come down the yield curve, and something like 85% of all tax exempt bonds get refunded before they get paid off because it makes economic sense to do that.
Can I jump in here for a second? So I think commissioners what you're asking for essentially are hard numbers, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
Can we
Okay.
start with total debt? Have we got a handle on what our total debt is?
All right. So remember when we talked last time when I told you that these numbers are going to dance around a little bit, right? Because what we look at and the way that the math is done in this is it's on a huge Excel spreadsheet, right? And it's percentage takes, it's rates, it's numbers, it's plugged in. You can move it to the right, you can move it to the left. And that's what we're doing. So when we presented you with the 24, we moved it all the way to the right. Right? What if hellfire fury falls upon Pipestone? Okay.
Yep.
What is the worst case scenario here? And will it be feasible? Right now, we're looking at will it be feasible? Or as Laura says, is this a reasonable risk? Right? Until we have the network architecture, we have bids in hand and engineering, we can't lock these numbers in. There's a lot of work between here and exact numbers. So she can give you a range of, if we push it out this far, this is what the percentage rate will be. If we can consolidate it and do this and move it down, this is what the percentage rate will be. Right? These are about what my costs will be. This is about how this is structured, but it's all in about, and until that design is done, there and bond sales are structured, there's no pinpoint, there's no way to pinpoint. Right? So that's your nervous part, right? Is that no one can hand you a hard copy of what this is yet. Now, after the network architecture is done, we can hand that to you. Right? What we're saying right now is that with the numbers that Kyle has put together, on the very high end, worst case scenario, nothing goes right, it's feasible. It's tight, right? So we don't expect to live there, right? So any surprises we have are happy surprises, the total cost comes down.
So am I hearing somewhere between 24 and 25 million is kind of a rough estimate at this point? Is that what
It's not even rough. I mean, it is high. It's contingency based. It is, right? So what you're probably looking at, Kyle, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I have the number here, Marlena, and
Go
yeah.
for it.
Right now, again, without bids and without engineering, our low estimate was 18.5. Our high estimate's 24, with our average bid expected to come in at 20 million. Extremely speculative.
I did wave my wand. No,
No, it's a little more than 20 million. But one of the things that's going to drive some of this down is that I put too much money in for bond interest rates. I had put too much money in for different contingencies here or there. And so those affect the low to the high range. And it's such a huge gap. You're talking about, $6 million here. We'd like to shore that up and get it precise,
And can I jump in a little bit, Kyle? So I'm thinking of the 20 million in terms of the construction number. Once I know that, then I would go in and, work with my staff. We would run preliminary debt service numbers. We wouldn't be able to completely lock those down until we go to the bond market, right? But I actually call underwriters, they give me estimated scales based on the day that I call them. But we would build in, the capitalized interest, and that's usually one that shocks people. I mean, it's a big number to make those interest payments for, 2 or 3 years, while that construction's going on. The cost of issuance relative to hiring the underwriter, legal counsel, we would detail all of that for you and let you see that. But again, I need the construction number to start.
To get a feel for what our actual debt would be, then our bond payments. So if we went with the $24 million and you said we need to put 20% skin in the game of ourselves, so that gives us almost $5 million, $4,800,000 just for our own buying our own ante.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And what would the bond payments be on $5 million?
Let me whip out my handy dandy. It looks like I'm whipping out my phone, but it's really my HP if I can get it to turn around. Yeah. There we go. Roughly $370,000 a year for 20 years on a GO bond. Now for the balance for the, so again, you would be issuing the debt for the fiber system revenue bonds, but they wouldn't, be coming at you for property taxes. They would just want those system revenues.
So that amount again was
370, over 20 years for the GO bond piece.
And that doesn't even touch our principal then of the 24 million there. So there's still $20 million worth of debt there that we haven't even addressed yet.
No. So what I would like to do, and if you from this conversation, if it would help you, I am happy to run, we would all know their preliminary, their, however you want to make sure that I know I'm not saying I can deliver these interest rates and this whatever, but I think it would help you if I said, okay, here's, if you're willing to do 20%, if we can all kind of sing kumbaya today, that maybe 20 million is a good example number, right? For the construction cost. If we say we want to see what would that 20 million look like, Laura, in these two pieces of debt with the capitalized interest, I can run those for you. The guy that would run them has a family funeral on Friday and is out all day tomorrow. So I couldn't get those done until Monday at the soonest, but I could get those done by Monday. And it would assume tax exemption, part of it GO. Obviously your GO is going to be rated. It would assume non-rated. I mean, I'd write up a little spreadsheet. Here's what it is. And then you could see what that looks like.
Now, one other thing, if I may interject,
Okay.
that's the total cost, Chairman and Council. We have the grants that we're going to be applying for that will also come off of that number, right? So, and we don't know what the grant awards may be. We just like Laura can't promise you interest rates and magic wand stuff from her office. We can't promise you a result with the grants, but what we do know is that we're expecting to have about 4 rounds of grants that are starting this summer, this fall-ish, and they don't give you much time at all to get those applications in. But there's 2 different grants that we want to apply for this year, 2 different grants we want to apply for next year, and then there's a third one. I think that's 2 or 3 years out, Laura. Marlena, is that about right?
That's the backup.
That's the fail-safe. Like if we don't get the first 4, then we're going to apply for the big grant that's coming from the federal government. So we are estimating, wide ranges of grant success and failure in this. And that's a number that we would like to shore up as well, but we won't know that until we have an award. We can't get an award until we do the engineering. It's just, it's where we're at. So we're looking,
Kyle, my question was kind of what you were talking about here. Does this say 20% we're talking about, do the grants, whatever grants we get, would that be used as that 20% or towards that 20%?
Absolutely. I mean, they're looking for skin in the game. It can be
Yes.
the same skin in the game that Laura uses to
Yes.
put in.
Right,
It's-
so that's
Grants help immensely.
a huge thing, huge.
That's a big thing. And then the other thing that scores really high on the grants from historic, I don't know what the new grants are going to score like, but the previous grants that have gone through, the less percentage of the cost that you're asking the grant folks to cover, the better your chances. So we found that people that were 50% or less in their grant ask, did better with the grant scoring and the grant awards. If you have a grant that is, let's say, 75% of the cost is grant eligible, and you apply for 75% and somebody else is applying for 30 or 50, they're likely to get the award. So you have to look at the competitive nature of the grant field, and we've got some data on that. Again,
Hey, so Laura actually has a meeting that we're over her time now.
Yep.
And thank you for that, because they're like, where are you?
If we could have just a second though, Laura, before you, Luke, did you have a question for Laura yet?
I have a number of questions,
Yeah,
but
so it's,
if you need to go, then we can.
Well, and I'm happy to reschedule. This other meeting is gonna last an hour. I could jump on with you again in an hour. I will say that, as you started to discuss grants, I mean, we can run several scenarios. So you can look at the what ifs in, quote unquote, with real hard numbers in front of you. So we could run a scenario where, you do the GO and you get some grant monies and we do the rest in bonds. And then you could do one where you do more in grant monies and get the bonds. I mean, I can run scenarios all day long. We can remount, paper. So if that's helpful, I just need to know what you would like me to assume in those scenarios.
well, real briefly, if you would, before I let you go, Dallas, did you have a question at all for Laura's?
Just wanted to get a sense of what your percentage is on the.
Yeah, typically on a transaction like this for non-rated bonds, I'll charge around $5 per 1,000 of bonds issued.
Okay.
So, on a $20 million non-rated transaction, that would mean my fee would be $100,000 payable at closing. And if we don't get to closing, the fee is $0.
Thank you.
Chris, a quick question at all? Yep. For Luke.
So going back to the numbers you gave us last week, if you were saying we should bond like 14.5 million. Is that correct, Marlena?
That's with the grants not being subtracted from the total, yes.
And of course, the first portion of the work you wanted to do was in the city of Pipestone, where you would not be eligible for any grants because it's already a served area.
you got to think of this in terms of a 3-year project, and which is not just going to be Pipestone if you proceed with this, but that is going to need to be the first population center hotted up, because it'll get that positive revenue that Laura is talking about, so we can get those bonds.
We'll start paying back the network.
Right,
Yeah.
but just doing the math on the 14.5 million, I mean, at 5%, that's 725,000 in interest per year, just straight out. So that means 3 years of capitalized interest is 2.175 million.
Yep.
Looking at the numbers that you provided in the handout that we were given about different scenarios, signups, residence bills and whatever. If you do all the math, the payback is somewhere in the $800,000 to $900,000 a year based on the debt service portion from all, single provider households, small business, large business. I'm guessing that the, payments on 14.5 million bond issue for 20 years is going to be somewhere in the $1.5 million range per year, including that 725,000 in interest. The amount coming in revenue is nowhere near the amount that would be required to make payments on an issue that large.
Okay, so 2 things. 1, let's let Laura run it on 20. Okay, and 2, Kyle has sort of an interactive tool that he's set up that's gonna allow us to move these around in real time and let you see what happens to these numbers as they bounce. I think that that would be helpful.
Yes,
when would you be
you can
providing
adjust. You can adjust different take rates for different markets. Right now, we have a take rate average at 39%, and that pays for the debt services, the maintenance, and it brings the ISPs in profitably at about, so, you know, depending on what their overhead is, they can range from maybe 28 to 53% profit margins there. So there's a lot of variables that you can set your rates at depending on how you want the network to work and what kind of risk you're willing to take. But our numbers do reflect that it's tight. I mean, it's going to have to be done carefully, but at the same time, there's nothing here that's jumping out to say this won't work. But
Laura, before we let you go, and I don't even know if I'm allowed to ask this, but we do need to let you go. The numbers in Wilmer, and they're different because they're not grant eligible. Right?
Right.
When we finally had the time and we fine-tuned those and we got them locked down. Right? What was the variance there?
Oh, I'm not prepared to answer that. I've worked on a lot of deals. I don't want to say
That's
something
fair.
that I'm gonna come to regret.
That's
I
fine.
apologize.
That's fine.
20%. I mean, had to throw out a number, I'd say 20, but
Okay.
I have to guess.
Okay.
I apologize for having to leave. I am happy to reschedule or run whatever series of debt service numbers you'd like to see. Again, my parting comment is, commissioners, I am concerned about the same thing you're concerned about. As your financial advisor, I want to know that you're likely to have the revenue to pay the bonds. I mean, otherwise, I'm going to say you've got to either have more cash up front. I mean, again, there could be solutions, but I don't want to put you into a transaction that is likely to default, and that is not going to help you. It's not going to help my business. It's, our interests are aligned.
Yep. And you told us that so far you have not had any clients default on their loan. That is a good thing.
I have not, and I've worked on some, not just fiber, I've worked on some really challenging transactions where we've just used like transient room taxes and tax increment bonds and some development finance. I mean, I do the plain vanilla stuff. I do geo bonds and water revenue and whatever, but I've worked on some really tough stuff as well. And I have not had one default in 33 years. I don't want you to be the first.
One of the obstacles that I see that does give me a great deal of concern, though, is this cost per pass. If the average is $3,400 to $3,500 per pass, and we're looking at 46, that's a 33% above the average that we're going to be looking at for cost.
But I need to make sure you understood the number I said was for effectively all of the US. So you're talking about highly dense areas where the cost per pass is lower.
Right.
And in rural, it's higher. So, and it is, I don't have a number for an average of cost per pass in more rural areas, but it does cost more the longer you have to run that fiber. So the number that is being used here doesn't worry me. It's just that it's rural, it's higher. So that's why grants are needed, more local government participation is needed, etc.
Understand.
I apologize, I have got to leave.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, it's 4:15 now, so we've got an hour and 15 minutes. Thank you so much. We'll
Thank you.
let you go, and then we should probably wrap things up pretty quickly too.
Okay.
Marlena, any closing comments or thoughts, or Kyle?
So you're scheduled to vote on this on Tuesday?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, I get the fear. Okay, I get the nervousness.
Okay, very good.
Okay, so
You will both join us Tuesday, I assume?
nah,
Ah.
I'm gonna wash my hair.
Um,
Yes, we will be here. Of course, we will be here. I think though that between now and then, let's keep an open dialogue. Okay. as questions come up, and they will, let's keep that open, and then know that this network architecture, right? It secures your grants, it secures your bonds, and it locks in your numbers. So with the scenarios that we've run back and forth and left and right, this still works. It's tight, but it works. Okay. If at any point it swings too far to the right, we stop. We are not interested in harming you. Okay, that's not our mission statement. Laura is not interested in having her first failed network. So there's a level of trust that we're asking for. When we get to that point, and at this point, a lot of stuff starts dancing around at the same time. Okay, so on Tuesday, you go yes for the proposal. We swing into network architecture. We swing into grant applications, the beginning of those. There needs to be a survey at some point in here. Legal gets involved, right? It starts spinning really fast, and there's a lot of different dances going on. All of these people are working for you, right? Your financial advisors are working for you. Your legal team is working for you. Hometown Fiber is working for you, and all of us have your best interest in mind. So if at any point there's a red flag, we'll throw our hands up. Right, but in order to get the numbers that you guys are looking for, it's the in it for a penny, in it for a pound thing. However, like I said, we swing these numbers hard both directions. This still works. There's no indication right now that this isn't going to work.
Well, very good. Thank you.
Yeah, and like I said, let's keep the conversation open, and as questions arise, let us know.
Yeah, and we're finalizing this interactive piece so that you guys can put different variables in it yourselves and in your own time frame. But so if you could send us some of the questions that you have or some of the specifics that you're looking for, we can make sure that those are represented in the data set. So I think I got a pretty good pulse of what you need, but if there's something specific, just let us know.
Steve, you've got a partial agenda put together for Tuesday already. What kind of time slot are we looking at for hometown?
It's pretty wide open right now. I can pretty much fit them in wherever we need to. I don't have a whole lot on there yet.
Okay, good.
So anytime works special for you guys, better than others.
And how much time would you like? Would 30 minutes, 60 minutes? What are you thinking?
That's all.
Well, it depends on what else you need from us.
Okay, good enough. We'll leave it open enough that we can adapt. So
Appreciate it.
I'll find the time and we'll be in touch.
very good.
Okay, that sounds good.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so
Appreciate it.
much.
Take care. Okay. Any closing comments, anybody at this point, or again, just try to absorb things before we actually adjourn, or? Yep, try to absorb it all.
Terry, you got any comments?
Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely.
You're a
In fact,
member of,
we welcome
Come on up.
your input.
So we can be on.
So I was questioning her $4,600 like you were per customer.
Mhm.
I did the math and that's 4,600 after the grants are received.
Oh,
So that makes more sense to me because I was like, there's no way that'll cost $4,600. But
yeah.
maybe in town, but not in the country.
No, it don't work that way. So the 4,600 is, you know, I think that's in range with the grants. So,
But the unknown variable there is the amount of the grants.
Yep.
Yep,
Yep.
and also the actual cost of the physical installation. So
Yep.
there's some variables.
yep, there's a lot of variables. One question I had looking at this whole thing, was the cost of the broadband itself to the consumer. And I know, we just looked at the sheet back there and it was $100, if I recall. I'll be honest with you, if I gotta try to sell $100 internet, I'm not gonna sell any.
Yep.
I'm gonna lose my butt. customers expect to pay somewhere between 50 and 70 around here. That's just the way it is. So if your math has to, if you need $100 to make it work,
It isn't gonna work.
I'd be very leery of it.
And don't you think it's gonna be less going forward? I mean, those rates will probably come down.
Yeah, I mean, it's not gonna get to $100, you
I
know?
mean, and the reason I say that is because when I was in the cities recently, I saw ads on TV. You could lock in 2 years of 1 gig service for $30 a month. Now I realize that's in the Twin Cities. They got way more people, blah, 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 but still, I
And-
mean, that's
Yeah.
pretty cheap compared, and we can't even get, I mean.
Yeah,
that
that's
type of
really
service
cheap.
here.
And I think people do understand that out here, it's maybe gonna be a little bit higher,
Right.
you know? But nobody, we have very few people paying $100 for internet. And those are gamers, you know, businesses,
Businesses.
that type of thing. Otherwise, the residentials, I don't know if we have any paying $100.
It's just not in the budget.
Yeah,
Did you have good sign up on the businesses in Edgerton?
yeah, we did.
That's what I've heard.
Yep,
Everybody
we've had
likes it.
really good take rate so far. Yep. Kind of right where we expected, or hoped, I guess. So yeah, that was a concern. I did the math on the $14 million bonding. 5% is 92,000 monthly. So it's gonna be $1.2 million, somewhere in there, you know, ballpark. Depending on interest rate, depending on how many years. I think I did I don't know if I did 17 or 20 years, I forget, but it was around that part, that amount. I haven't seen the numbers as far as, I don't totally understand how the, you know, I charge a customer, you know, what do I pay the county? You know, that, all that kind of stuff. I haven't seen any numbers on that yet. Out of that $100 or, you know, average $100, what is mine? What is the county's? What is hometowns? I don't know any of that.
One of the handouts has it in there.
Basically putting this at about
$60.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Page 2 of that, yep.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and I'll look at it.
But still 60% of $30 is a lot less than 60% of $100.
Yeah, I just.
Even using their numbers, it still doesn't pencil out. I mean, I question whether enough people will pay this much, and even if they do, assuming that, it's still not enough to make the payments.
Yeah, if you try to do that in Pipestone, you'll get crucified paying $100,
Right.
even if it's fiber. And I mean, yeah, people want fiber, but they are not gonna pay $100 if the two competitors in town are at $40.
Right.
They're not. We've dealt with competitors before. We know.
Even rural, I've talked to a lot of people
Oh,
that
yeah.
said, would you like fiber internet, fiber optic?
Yeah.
Yeah, how much it's gonna cost? First
Yeah.
question.
Yeah,
First
I
question.
mean, we got people that don't wanna pay $50. You know what I mean? That's just the way it is.
Hey, Terry,
$100 is just,
he's got an example of 9,500 per household per month. But then he's got, it broke down and the service provider would be $20.90, but can you,
that's my,
that's yours.
Yeah,
Can
and-
you do it for that?
No.
Yeah.
Didn't think so.
No,
I think, you know,
He has some maintenance on there though too. That would probably go to him.
no,
also.
that's hometowns.
Yeah,
That's,
yep, that's our maintenance because we own the fiber.
yeah.
That's hometowns.
So, yeah, we own.
It also said if anything goes wrong, call the ISP, it says on there.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I need more than that just to cover my,
Yeah, well.
Exactly.
we just do. It just, you know, we're probably closer to the $30 mark really to be honest, at our break even.
And how can we project these costs out 10, 15, 20 years? We're talking a 20-year debt here.
Yeah.
How's this all gonna work in the future?
20-year debt on this type of stuff, it's a little scary. You know, farm ground is one thing.
Yeah, because there's always gonna be
A
there.
farm,
That's
or in a
right.
house, you know, that's one thing, but technology, the way it changes, I mean, I think fiber is gonna be there yet, but what's gonna be left of it in 20 years?
at one time they talked about 50-year life.
They did, yep. We don't know yet.
I don't believe that myself,
But
but
there's two different parts of that. There's the fiscal life of the infrastructure, but then there is the market.
electronic stuff,
The
which is it.
value. Does anybody want it 20 years from now? Will anybody want to buy it at all? Or is
Right,
be
what's it
something
gonna
else?
be worth in 20 years?
Yeah.
It'll be worth very little.
if they get satellites figured out.
Yeah, you never know, and the 5G, who knows? Maybe they'll come out with a new technology and 5G will take over. Yeah, we don't know them things. I don't think that's gonna happen in the near future, but strange things happen. You just never know. You hate going that far out in technology that many years. We get scared at 10.
Mhm.
Well, and again, what you've done the last 8 years, you got a third of the county covered. That's terrific.
Yeah, and we'd like to do more with the county. I mean, I'll be honest, I don't want you to hold me to anything at, what I'm saying here, but.
Right.
Is there any way for us to facilitate that?
Yeah.
Well, and that's kind of what, we've started discussing amongst us. For me to come in and do the town of Pipestone right now it's a big chunk for us. We're doing Slayton, we're doing a couple other projects. The town of Pipestone is too large for us
Yeah.
financially. It
But
just
that's
is.
not a priority for us.
No, and that's exactly right. I mean, I would like, don't get me wrong, but in the next
Mhm.
year, we can.
But if we had a 5-year plan to cover the balance of the county.
And maybe something like that, yeah. My initial thoughts were, okay, we know these grants are coming out. We don't know the full extent of them yet. There's one coming out September, October timeframe of this year. We do know that. There's it gets complicated. There's $50 million that are gonna be for this year, 50 for next year in this round.
And that isn't a lot of money.
No, exactly, yeah, especially when you start looking at $20 million.
Well, yeah, I think we're gonna get 10 million out of that.
Yeah, that's the max you can get in one grant application is 10. You could apply for 2 grants, split the county in half and apply for 2 separate grants.
Mhm.
They like spreading the money around the state. We do know that. They do that every year. It's geographically spread around the state. But it could be a 2-year. And then we know the BEAD program is coming out. I talked with the Office of Broadband on Friday. They think that's gonna be 2 years before money's rolling on that. We're already 2 years into it, nothing's happened. And they still don't have the amount of money set aside that Minnesota's going to be getting. That's not set yet. Once that's set, they have to go through, all the states have to send in their application forms, get that approved, and then they can start sending out applications to the consumer.
Makes you wonder if they don't spend more just doing all this planning than they do actually doing the work.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly right. So one thought we had was, hey, we're gonna do a design on the rural. See what it costs, not that I don't trust them, but I trust my numbers over anybody's, our engineers, because we know, I trust them. I like working with people I know and trust.
Mhm.
We're gonna get a cost of what it is. If it's $16 million, we go in for grants, try to get either 2 8s or a 10 and a 2 the next,
If you could
whatever.
get 75% through that rural.
If we could get
program.
a 75% grant on the rural, so we get down to $4 million total cost for rural. Maybe, these are just numbers I'm throwing out there because like I said, we don't have it designed either, but maybe we come back and say, okay, I can spend this much because I know what I need for a return, for me to move forward with any project. And then maybe I'd come back to you guys and say, maybe we need $2 million from the county to move forward. Well, that's maybe a little more attractive to you guys than a $15 million project. I don't know, and maybe that's something, once we get it designed and we have an idea what the costs are, I can come back and kind of go over that with you, where we are, where we think we would need to be. I have a very good idea of what our take rate's gonna be, what I can charge. So we can kind of pin that down, and I have a good financial person in my office that works on this stuff every day. That has it down to the penny of what we think we can make, and she's usually pretty damn close, so.
Well, I'm very encouraged by this conversation that we've got some other options. Obviously, at this point, we do owe it to Hometown Fire to meet with them Tuesday. We'll get that
Absolutely.
resolved. After that issue's resolved, depending on which direction we're going, give you a chance to put some designs together,
Yeah.
get some thinking, and then maybe we can meet together in the future and just kind of brainstorm where we're
Yeah,
at.
and I think that's kind of the best plan is, like I say, I don't have an exact plan yet, but I think throwing ideas around and,
Are you booked up this year for sure?
this year we are full.
It'll be next year.
Yeah, it would have to be a next year project anyway because of the
that's-
grants.
Yeah, that's not a problem.
By the time they get the grants, the opening is gonna be September, October. They won't award them till January, February. It's never quick. And then, yeah, so it would be a next year project at best. So,
Well, let's kind of leave that very informal at this
Yeah.
point.
Yep.
We'll get this.
Yeah, like I
first
said, I
issue
don't, you
resolved and
know,
we'll go forward.
these
from
are
that
just
point.
ideas. There's
Yep.
nothing in.
We're thinking out loud right now.
One other thing one other thing I wrote down, one thing that scares me, when she said they need $1 million to design the project.
Yeah.
Right now,
floored me.
right now.
Yeah.
500,000 today.
Floored me. I'm not kidding you. I mean, I would think like a Finley Engineering.
Yeah.
You know, we have them design our projects all the time and you know, 100,000 goes a long way on something like that.
And I think, didn't she talk about Bolton and Mink being one of the engineering firms that they use? Or is
They're
that
working
firm?
with them. They're
They're
it is
partners.
a part.
Yep.
Their fee is 5% of the project. That's where they get the $1 million, 25 million,
Oh, sure.
20 million times 5%.
Yeah.
That just seemed, shocked me when she said that. I mean, unless she's talking, that's the whole, you know, not only the design, but you know, the
Writing the grants and all that. good stuff.
grants and, you know, the
Supervising of construction.
supervising the construction and then doing the mapping and everything else
final
involved,
turnover.
maybe. It could be, but before I jump into $1 million obligation for design, I would kind of get some clarification on what that involves. So,
Okay,
got any other questions? Let me know. And you know, yeah, we get some stuff kind of thrown together. Melissa and I and maybe AJ Osfrey will come down and we'll just talk.
that'd be great. Very good. We appreciate that.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
I think then, if anybody else got any other closing comments? Okay, if not, I will adjourn the meeting then at 4:33. It looks like 4:35. That one's off a little bit. Thank you, guys. And Kyle,